I'm assuming that we are live. Hello, hello, everybody. Hello across the plane. This is John TheMorgile. Going to do a live stream for you guys out there. Static Plain Truth Hangout with some dear friends and a couple of other people too. No, I'm kidding. And tonight we're going to have just a lot of fun hanging out with a couple of YouTubers that some of you guys may know, some of you guys may not. And we'll go ahead and do a round of introductions before we get started with everything. I guess I'll say before we get started that my internet went down for some reason earlier today, and so I was unable to host this event. And luckily, at the very last minute, I was able to get the lovely Karen B to host this for me. So
shout out to Karen B.
Yeah, shout out to Karen B. Karen, how you been doing? Oh, I think she's on mute. I know she said she had to go get her youngin' something to eat, so maybe we'll do her last. Besides Karen B, we've also got Travis. And Travis, why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your YouTube channel and do a quick intro.
All right, sure. My name's Travis, and my YouTube channel is The Plain Truth, and it's just a small expression of mine to just voice my thoughts and my observations. I've got some lunar observations and then also some video presentations where I just kind of talk about my voyage and my thoughts about the flat plane. And so I'm just trying to network and rub elbows and talk with everybody and continue to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome, man. Awesome. So how long have you been looking into flat Earth, or how long have you been a flat earther per se?
My rabbit hole plunge happened back in August when the eclipse came around, and it just hit me out of the blue. Somebody posted a meme on Facebook about the horizontal shadow over the moon if the Earth was flat, and I'm like, what? Flat Earth? What? And then not too soon after that, I heard someone else give an explanation of their thoughts on flat Earth, which had to do with the aviation flights from the East Coast to the West Coast, and I just my jaw hit the floor, and I just thought that makes total sense, and I haven't been the same since. So it's been since August.
Okay, awesome. Well, it's good to have you, Travis. Thanks for joining us, and we also have John. What's up, John? How you doing, bud?
I am doing great. Thanks for having me on the show. Oh, I almost dropped this.
Well, so, John, if you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and I think you've got a YouTube channel as well, or no?
No, I don't, but I also host a Facebook group along with Travis called Rethinking the Curve. That's another thing that Travis and I are both a part of.
Okay.
That's the most of the public involvement that I get into, besides just talking to people on a regular basis. And we all know how insanely controversial the topic is, and unnecessarily controversial the topic is, but it is what it is. So I'm a busy enough guy to not be able to make it a full-time project like you all.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely. Well, if you become a flat earther, it really does sort of change your paradigm to the degree where it almost seems like a logical decision between doing flat Earth stuff full time or maintaining your career or something. Maybe that's a bad analogy, but it is just that important. It's one of those things because and except for Travis is sort of a weirdo when it comes to the whole conspiracy theory thing. But most people, they have sort of a buffer zone between, being a regular normie and then becoming a flat earther. And that buffer zone, like for me personally, was over the course of decades, right? So I was questioning, 9/11 a long time ago, and these other events that are questionable.
What?
The moon
You
landing.
9/11? What? That's a joke.
Right. Travis was telling me the other day, and this is actually the first
yeah.
time
You need to qualify about what you mean by my being a weirdo. Okay.
Yeah, no, I am. I was totally messing with totally messing with you. But the reason that he's such a weirdo is because he was telling me the other day that and one of the things that struck me is I'd never heard of this before, and in fact, I've had discussions with people several times where I didn't even think it was possible for someone to go from pretty much a regular normie all the way to a flat earther and let's see, a possible 9/11 conspiracy theorist to and everything in between within the course of just a few months. So, like,
I think I helped him a little bit with that.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
that's the funny part, right? That's the funny part. My first conspiracy was flat Earth, and I jumped headlong into it. And then within a month or so, John and I were talking, and he started bringing up vaccines, and we were talking, and I just kept, my mind was just open, and everything, I just jumped into everything. It was just, yeah. So I was weird, and I would say I was an anomaly. I wouldn't call myself a weirdo, John. So
yeah,
maybe we can...
I would. I know Travis personally. I've met him. But what can I say? A good kind of weirdo. We're great friends.
Right,
So,
right.
I'm weird too.
There's really nothing weird about it. I would actually call it more amazing in a sense that because honestly, like if you come to the conclusion that the Earth is unequivocally flat, then that means you have to realize that NASA has been lying, and that means that the government, if they're going to lie about that, then they'd lie about pretty much everything. And so,
then all these private institutions have to be influenced by the lies and persuaded to perpetuate them, and maybe even like just pretend like the lie doesn't exist, or maybe not even want to know about the lie in order to do business. I mean, it goes deeper and deeper.
Right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But and I think that the biggest part is like I never thought it would be possible for someone to go from pretty much I don't want to say that you're like a Fox and MSNBC watcher or anything like that, but I did that for many years of my life, and I would pretty much believe anything that was presented to me on the mainstream media. Never really thought twice about for example, Pearl Harbor being a possible false flag sort of event. And
that's normal though. That's normal though. That's like you're describing the majority of Americans.
Right. But to have flat Earth sort of dumped on you all at once without having any of that sort of psychological preparation, and then coming out the other side of that a flat earther, to me is it's unheard of. And so that I just wanted to mention that because like I said, I've had a couple conversations with different people, and we had all sort of come to the conclusion that there's no way you could become a flat earther unless you were aware of other stuff like the Vietnam Gulf of Tonkin and like JFK, and I'm sure you'd probably heard of that, 9/11 and all this stuff. So yeah, man, it's definitely definitely a first for everything, but it is promising to me because it shows that there are people out there who are open-minded enough that wouldn't be necessarily described as conspiracy theorists that can fairly easily become a card-carrying flat earther. So yeah. Nothing so weird about that so much as it is unheard of and commendable.
I agree. Yeah. When somebody can just more or less use common sense and be openly like neutral at first and really consider like what the implications of it, and then be willing to take more steps in that direction just to simply learn and not be, pushed away by it, or want to push it away from them. I find most people are reactionary, whether it's flat Earth or JFK or 9/11 or whatever. Most people are reactionary. They only believe the news, and there's a million news reports, but as long as the news gives it, that's what they're buying.
Right. And when you go back and look at things like 9/11, I think it's pretty much we can all agree that the official narrative is absolutely wrong. All all of the evidence that they found, like passports that came out of a burning jet, where they didn't ever find the black boxes that are basically indestructible. But of course, they find a ID card and a passport. So
Oh,
I mean, there's
yeah.
just all these different inconsistencies and just things that don't make a lot of sense with the 9/11 official narrative. And it's like they got away with it. Whoever's responsible for it got away with it. They basically carted off all the evidence to China. Like they took all the scrap metal and everything and sold it to China, which is basically, getting rid of the crime scene. And they got away with it. Now, 20 some odd years later, the general public, I believe, knows that it was not as the official narrative says, yet and still, people refer to it to this day in the news and in social media, that 9/11 was an act of terrorism by 19 guys with box cutters. And it's just funny to me that these people got away with it. We got into this never-ending war on terrorism for completely unfounded reasons. And it's like, when is justice served on this? Like, knowing about this whole thing being a basically false flag is good and all, but when is justice served? It really is sort of frustrating to me. But maybe getting a little bit off topic.
Well, I know people that will say immediately, they've even said it to me, that they don't even care if the official narrative is wrong because they trust the government to keep things from the public for national security reasons. So
that's
put that in your pipe and smoke it. It's like, oh, wow, okay. Just, okay. I mean,
that's it. I mean, and anytime the government wants to do something either illegal, immoral, questionable, frivolous, unscrupulous, they just lie about it. And they say, well, you don't get to know that because it's classified. It's a matter of national security. And, by Freedom of Information Act requests, the few that go through after millions of dollars in spending for it, you come to find out that the government is hiding all kinds of stuff. So, I would say that people who trust the government or trust the military inherently are a bit naive. And when you get into entities like NASA, who are, they're an extension of the military, the Department of Defense, and then even a further extension, SpaceX, who are like basically the same thing. You just have this pseudoscientific institute posing as an authority on truth and science. And all the while, they're doing nothing but deceiving people and just lying through their teeth. But because of the fact that people will believe whatever is presented to them through the mainstream, then people, that's what people believe.
Yeah. Now, Morgile, you and I were talking, and I was relaying the conversation that I had last week with a guy when I was at the restaurant where I go on a weekly basis when I'm on my route. And so I opened up the conversation with Flat Earth. And we had a pretty decent conversation, and then he freely admitted that he was full blown into JFK, and he was a conspiracy guy with that topic, but he would not touch 9/11. That was full blown, just like the narrative says, and he would not question it whatsoever. So it's so interesting, the different mentalities that approach these things, where you might be open on one or two or three conspiracies, but there's some that you just will not budge on. The other thing that I find interesting in John's and my relationship is that at the beginning of the year, John asked me, he said, so is there anything else? Is there anything you're looking into? And right then at that moment, I thought, okay, here it is. Here's the defining moment of our friendship. And I said, yeah, I not really.
You said something about water remaining level. That's how you began it.
Did I? I thought I said something like, I'm not really sure the heliocentric model is really where I'm going to be hanging my hat anymore. Trying to get around the barn and without having to say flat Earth right away. But yeah,
I picked up on it. In fact, since the listeners wouldn't even know this. Like, what makes that story interesting is that I have only been a flat earther for less than a year, less than Travis has been. I'm immersed in it. I'm fascinated by it. I want to actually learn the technicalities of it, just like I would of any ordinary science. I'm a master electrician by trade, so I like these kinds of things. And when Travis initially had brought this up to me, I not only thought he was crazy, but I tried to persuade him to be a glober, like myself at the time, getting the best stuff I could find on the internet to show him just how stupid and ridiculous he was. We hit kind of like a breaking point in our good friendship, and I was just like, fine, whatever, like show me some stuff. Because Travis would say, look, like I'm not like trying to be insulting. He said this in a genuinely friendly way. He was just like, I'm not trying to be insulting, but like these are amateur things. There are explanations out there. It's more than I can handle, but you'd have to watch these videos and you'd have to read this stuff. And so I was like, fine, I'll do it. And I did. I actually like paid attention, tried, instead of like finding videos to debunk him, like trying to rationalize, like just presupposing that he's wrong, right? I stopped and I was like, okay, I'm going to try to see this from a flat earther perspective as much as possible. And Travis led me down that rabbit hole, and that's history now. I mean, I'm absolutely convinced about flat earth theory. In fact, I cannot imagine that it's a globe anymore. In fact, there are things like you say, Morgile, like in response to what is it, Sapien or whatever that guy is,
Greater Sapien.
Greater Sapien. By the way, the triple response was very enjoyable. By the way, I like it.
Yeah, you were the one that watched it all the way through. Thank you.
I am. Yeah. Everybody's complaining about like 2-hour videos, and I'm just like, well, I can put on my earbuds and listen to it. It was good, and like those kinds of responses don't matter to me, and I tend to think now, like you say, like that again is irrelevant. You would repeatedly say that's irrelevant, that's irrelevant, that's irrelevant, even though Greater Sapien doesn't seem to be picking up on why that is. It's just a presuppositional commitment. You begin with the assumption that something is foundationally true, then you work things out from that, and lo and behold, like there's no reason to believe we live on a spinning blue marble. I agree with DITRH that I agree. There isn't one proof yet that I'm convinced of that is an absolute proof that we live on the spinning ball. And I'm with you.
Yeah, no, like I totally know what you mean. Starting off, like you had said, Travis was kind of trying to get his foot in the door with flat Earth with you, and I know how precarious that can be because if you're having intellectual conversations with people and the flat Earth topic, you're wanting to bring it up, the last thing you want to do is say the words flat Earth, because you're gonna totally ruin your credibility pretty much instantly, because there really is such a stigma and sort of pre-programmed auto response that we all get when we hear that phrase. And that's not an accident. That was very meticulously, I believe, sort of supplanted into our psyche, very
absolutely.
early on.
It's everywhere in our culture. And the more that our culture depends upon its major media formats technologically throughout the last 100 years, it's always been a part of it in every format. Even though the formats have changed, now we've got smartphones and iPads, and who knows what the next technology is. It's like even before all of that, there were major media outlets influencing the way people think, and all they had to do is keep it constant and running all the time, and people believe it, people imbibe it.
Right. Well, that's one of the key elements of mind control and propaganda is repetition. Somebody, and it's repetition, and it's also done incrementally over time, to where over a 50-year period, you might see social norms change drastically. But somebody that experienced that 50-year period, the changes were so slow and incremental that they, sort of like boiling a frog, the slow and incremental change isn't really noticed all that acutely. And when things are being repeated to you, the mind, tends to incorporate that into your thought processes. and using, like you said, the 24-hour media sort of bread and circus tactic. The powers which ought not be have made a fine art out of molding, people's subconsciouses and manufacturing consent for, plans that people would otherwise have nothing to do with. And the globe certainly notwithstanding. But it's funny that you had also mentioned that you guys had been friends for quite a while, and the flat Earth topic was beginning to drive a wedge in your friendship. Yeah. And that's definitely not the first time I've heard that.
That was my fault, by the way, not Travis's. Totally my fault. I was the jackass of the friendship.
I didn't feel like it was that overt. I wasn't put off by anything that was going on. I just knew that it was going to be something that we were going to work through, and I knew like
200 texts later, and how many you shared YouTube videos, and you didn't get annoyed with me?
No, not. I mean, honestly, I think that that's my personality. That I'm that loose in terms of being flexible with patience and waiting and whatnot. But I thought this too. I thought, okay, John is the one guy that I trust that if I'm wrong and he tells me that I'm wrong, I'll believe him. And so when he came around, and it was so funny, when he finally came out and he said, I think I'm on board with this thing. I was like, wow, that was crazy.
And you know what it was for me? I know I haven't shared this publicly, but like what it was for me, what was being absolutely convinced that the moon landings were impossible. Mostly because of radio transmission from the moon and back, and how chintzy tin cans can't make it to the moon at that time. And like once that was solidified in my mind rather quickly, I thought to myself, well, if you fake it once, you got to fake it forever. But then beyond that, all this ISS stuff. I talked to my friend who's a head engineer for the Wisconsin's major power plant about all this stuff, and he was just telling me, well, just go online for the ISS. You can see it fly overhead, and you can watch it live, and like, that's what more proof do you need? And I mean, I probed all my friends that are into the sciences, and they're hard engineers. Like they're brilliant people. I respect them. My brother is a brilliant engineer. I asked him a bunch of things. He might think I'm crazy. I know at the time we last talked, he thought I was, and he's a good guy. We agree to disagree on things, but like I probed and I probed and I probed, and I was getting this same kind of blanketed, what they tell you on TV kind of answers, and everything else was mathematical. But I get math. I mean, I'm a master electrician. I get math. I get how math formulas can produce positive and negative answers, and yet you still have to sort between which one fits reality, and that's totally based on a presupposition. And I just thought to myself, God, there's so much stuff with the ISS and with the moon that's fake. Like I don't know how people can just rationalize this away. This is so clearly fake. And those are the things that led me down to dive into the physics and everything with refraction and atmospheric bifringence and all the other little fun stuff that you all talked about before.
Yeah.
Distance of the sun, distance of the moon. I'm still perplexed by the moon.
And in what way do you mean?
Because it doesn't really matter to me what theories are proposed by flat earthers or NASA. At some point, it's just a mysterious light. And I think that we can definitely show that it's closer than what's claimed to be, and that it's not what the official stories claim. I'm just mesmerized by it. I'm more mesmerized by the moon than I am the sun. I mean, you can take sunlight, you can do all kinds of crazy things. Even ancient civilizations did crazy things with light. Like they cut stone with light, and they did all kinds of cool things. But the moon, it's a whole other critter. Like it totally baffles me. And there's no way that I'm going to believe that it's as far away as NASA says it is, or that we ever landed on it, or that it's perfectly matching in sync with the rotation of the Earth, so we only see one side of it. Like none of that stuff makes sense to me anymore. It just is truly a phenomenon in my mind. And if I never get an answer to it, that's fine. I'm open to mystery. Doesn't bother me in the slightest. Life's mysterious.
Yeah, and I agree with you, man, about the moon being, well, having that geosynchronous orbit and rotation, or however they call it. But having that sort of thing happen because of random chance is just one in many billions, I would imagine. And of course, they have to come up with theories like tidal locking and all of this nonsense to explain it away. But in fact, yeah, that's a pretty big one. That even as a globe earther, I always was sort of fascinated with that because, or confused or perplexed by that, because in order for the moon to only ever show us one face, the amount forever, for all of recorded history, the amount of precision and timing on that, it's almost like there's a timing belt right in the in the solar system, because it really is just uncanny. And that sort of thing, I guess you could say I was a dork growing up, but I thought about that sort of thing quite a bit. And yeah, that's a good point. Listen, guys, real quick, my internet actually just came back on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get on this stream from my PC. And if you guys don't mind just holding it down for me for a minute, I'm going to see if I can get on this thing from my computer, but I am having a little trouble doing that. And I suck at trying to, walk and breathe at the same time. So I'm just going to go on mute for maybe a minute or two, if you guys don't mind, and hopefully I'll be right back from the PC.
So you're leaving us alone with all of these people?
Yeah, yeah. Just don't break anything. Really, I'll be right back though. Give me a minute.
Yeah, when I think about the what we're told about planetary bodies, man, Travis, like that just doesn't compute in my mind anymore. I hear all these stories, whether it's from SpaceX News or I see things on the Weather Channel app. Everything's everywhere, convincing us of the model that exists. And it's like, since there are no alternatives presented in a positive light, everything's absolutized. There doesn't seem to be a way to escape it except to just simply get out and open on channels like this and be more open-minded and talk possibilities and actually talk reality. I mean, there are real alternatives, and I'm shocked. Like when we're on Rethinking the Curve and we're talking about this stuff with Globers that come on and ask genuine questions, they're asking questions that just completely take for granted all the models that they've become accustomed to, and they don't have a way to sort out the information. It still must fit into one of the organizational boxes that they're used to. And part of all of this is being able to communicate and resort what's in those boxes.
And the thing that I think too is that they aren't able to hold the two ideas in tandem. And if this new information that's coming in is so diametrically opposed, they don't try to figure out how it could possibly be. They just completely dismiss it because they're holding on to the larger narrative, because that's a safety zone. That's really that's part of it is the safety zone that narrative provides. Because if you step outside of that zone, then you are going to have conflict with those that you're leaving behind. And that's not a safe place to be.
Yeah, it's like leaving a tribe and going to explore on your own to find new land. And people just think you're crazy for doing that on your own. Kind of like a Moana deal. I got my kids' movies in mind right now. Moana going to return the Sacred Heart, or whatever the little green gem is.
Yeah.
You back online, John?
It seems. Well, let me turn my thing down here. Yep. Bear with me, guys.
Oh, yeah. Well, anyways, Travis, what I was saying is, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It can be uncomfortable. It could just be totally foreign, and people think it's nuts because there's so much that we've objectified and we think is just absolute, and there's no question about it, and there's no reason to question. Everybody can just be comfortable where they are.
And there's so much that you have to change as well, because the larger narrative changes so much. It's not just one little linchpin. It's the entire mechanism that has to be changed out. You've got it. It just touches so many different areas of reality.
That makes me think of immediately is a conversation that I had with a guy who is a medical doctor, and this was about 2 weeks ago, a little over a week ago. And I had just mentioned some stuff that I was researching about magnetism and the nature of fields and the nature of how it influences atomic structures according to atomic theory, and atomic particle theory. And I just mentioned in passing something interesting. It wasn't really flat Earth related at all. I have no intention in letting this guy know that about me, because he'd be very reactionary, I imagine. And I mentioned electrons and looking at them under microscopes and what we actually see to what is theorized. And I told him, I said, when I went to school to become a master electrician for all those years, there wasn't anything in school that was clear about what electrons are and how they move. And I know we've got theories about them, and I know we can work with things. Or capacitance is another thing I brought up. And I said, it's really dawning on me that that it was well known that we actually don't know what's going on, but the theories do match what we work with electrically with matter. And and he said, well, we know that and this is what he told me. He's like, well, we know that electrons are that they exist as really tiny particles. They're just really, 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 really tiny, and we can't see them. And I just thought to myself at that moment, I don't want to carry on this conversation because that's a total assumption. That's what I learned in school. But what I'm saying is that I've been learning alternatives to what we think of as electrons, what we measure, and how all of that works. There are alternatives out there scientifically, but again, you can't, if you don't talk about them as microscopic particles, then it's like this guy doesn't know how to process it, and everything I would say would just go against quote unquote science.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and I think I agree with you because the electric theory or electromagnetic theory, we know how to manipulate whatever that system is that's going on, by rotational magnetic fields and coils and wires and things like that. But the theory as to what's going on, on the inside of that wire in terms of, electrons being transferred at the speed of light, that is all very much theoretical. And, you had mentioned that the theory matches what we see. But of course, that's because the theory was, crafted around observations. So it's no surprise that it does sort of jive with it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's going on, on the inside of that wire.
Yeah, we supposedly have these things called valence electrons that are moving very microscopically. But when you actually get down to what can be observed, it just looks like vibrations, which of course can just be fields that are reacting with everything around it. But they don't want to describe it that way. They're presuming atomic particle theory because they don't know how to think of it in any other way. Everything's material. There's no ether. There's nothing. But you start bringing in the ether, and you start bringing in all these other things regarding magnetism, and us living in a terra firma, fixed, closed environment. That really does change everything. That changes everything. The anode and cathode of this plane we live on makes more sense to me than there being just these layers and layers and thinnings of gases that go up into this vacuum of space. That has never made sense to me. I just had to take it on faith, and now it makes sense to me that that's not true. That can't possibly be true.
Right, because it's a strange sort of psychological observation that it's a foregone conclusion in all of science that the Earth is a spinning sphere, and everything else is crafted or back engineered around that premise that must never be questioned. And so, the gradient of the atmosphere, like you just mentioned, that's another one of those things that I was always baffled about, because, at some point, infinite space is out there, and it's supposedly this vacuum. So what is keeping our atmosphere around the Earth? And of course, they say that it's gravity, but when you start to actually think about it, it doesn't make sense. However, if you're ever presented with the even the hypothesis of a flat Earth, then you'll never come to the conclusion that there's, this is actually a deal breaker piece of evidence, for the globe.
Yeah, I remember asking my top engineer friend a simple question about space travel, because he deals with incredibly high pressure systems, special sensors and special equipment to look through metals and look through high pressure systems for microscopic things like cracks. And he works for Wisconsin's largest electrical and energy plant, and he's one of the top engineers for it. And I asked him a simple question about, like, so the space is a perfect vacuum, and we puncture it, with like I don't care, a satellite, a rocket, whatever. We puncture it. What keeps everything from imploding? And you know what he said? He said, well, when the atmosphere, it must have something kind of like water, where you just go through certain layers of it and then you go out the other end. And I was just like, that's not an explanation. That's not what they say it is. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But it must be true, because we've got pictures from outer space.
Right. And we all know that pictures can't be faked.
Yeah. Oh man.
So go ahead. Sorry.
I love my brothers that are totally globers. I mean, I have to have some humility to myself, where it's like I was one not too long ago. But man, it's not like there isn't a sufficient amount of evidence out there for a newbie to just peruse and think for himself, be a little more open-minded, and be persuaded that there are at least alternatives out there. We're not insane. Like, whatever happened to that engineer guy, or the civil engineer guy, Mullen? Whatever happened? Anybody hear about him?
Brian?
He's off radar. That's all I know.
Well, I don't know exactly what happened, but from what I heard through the grapevine, and you know how that goes, is that somebody out there was actually going after his engineering licenses, like trying to, and
I heard that too through another avenue.
Right.
So which doesn't surprise me at all. It's just, jealousy and strife and other things take down nations. It'll take down an individual too.
It is a shame, because for people to go after someone's livelihood because of a simple disagreement is, that's terrible, man.
I agree. Yeah.
The fact that we have to choose between being vocal flat earthers or successful in our careers, it is a little bit sad, but to me, it's also kind of emboldening, because, what are you going to do? Are you going to stand up for what you believe in, or are you going to conform to what you disagree with because you must survive? And, for somebody like Brian, who was obviously successful, went through school to be an engineer, comes to the conclusion, and I don't even think he really made too many absolute statements about flat Earth. I think what he was doing was more along the lines of questioning the globe and finding some glaring problems with it. I mean, that's science. That, we're people after the truth, and yet again, there is this stigma against being a flat earther. And so for someone to, and I don't know exactly what happened, but for someone to go after your professional, personal career because of that disagreement, apparently it worked to silence him, because I haven't heard much from him on YouTube for a while either. But yeah, it just goes to show what lengths people will go to shut this thing up.
Yeah, I sometimes fear over a couple of my friends who are flat earthers that are in construction. Like, one has been a surveyor for over 25 years, and when he talks about it, he actually got to the point this year where he said, I can't talk about it anymore, even at work. I can't even ask questions. I can't even be open-minded and just be like, hey, well, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? What do you think of this? With people that are doing the same work with him for all these decades. you know, I worry that like even he could lose his job. You know, it's weird.
Right.
So it's a weird feeling, but like it it it's only weird because of what's mainstream.
Well, and when you're in a position where potentially millions of dollars or even people's lives are at stake, the last thing, you know, your superiors, in quotes, want to learn is that you are a crazy flat earther, because of course that's the knee-jerk reaction that everyone has. And so, yeah, it can be career suicide. Now, there are some people in different parts of the world. I'm assuming he's in America, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
like I have a buddy that I talk to from time to time on Skype who's in, oh goodness, I can't think of the name of the city. Oh, Bergen. It's at 60 degrees north, I want to say. Anyway,
The country, John, the country. Where is it?
Bergen, it's in the north. And anyway, the point though is he's sort of like a big boss man for the company that he works for. It's a big, you know, technological, successful company. He does. I don't know exactly what it is that he does, but one of the things that he uses on a daily application is, oh, what is the term for it? He's a brilliant mathematician. It's I'll think of it when I'm not thinking of it. But anyway, he's the boss man for lots of people, and he basically just goes around telling everybody that the Earth is flat, and he calls them stupid. Oh, and by the way, the guy's 2 meters tall. His name's Bear. Yeah, 2 meters tall. And he just willy-nilly, you know, he has free reign to go around and talk about flat Earth all that he wants, and he, you know, people probably give him shit for it, but it's not like he's going to lose his job over it. So, you know, eccentricity-based mathematics is the thing, and there is a bit of a language barrier when we've spoken, but it was just nice to see that there are countries out there and places out there where people can talk about these sorts of things and not have to worry about getting, you know, fired or blackballed or whatever. So,
I think it'll be good that if the flat Earth community, like the real flat Earth community, like us, like that if we maintain peace and as much as we can do, because last thing we want this to become is some crazy person, some flat Earth person does something insane, and then all of a sudden it becomes like a hate crime to be a flat Earther. You never know what's going to happen.
Right. Well, I mean, with the way PC stuff's going these days, you know, nothing would really surprise me. But then again, shouldn't it be like, shouldn't there be politically correct protection for flat earthers? Like, shouldn't it be a hate crime to, I don't know, punch a flat earther in the face or something? I don't know.
Yeah. At some level, even being involved in any of that stuff, with the way things are going legally in America, just being a part of an accusation is enough to cripple someone financially just through getting legal counsel. It's insane what's going on in America today. It's insane. I try to mind my own business with everything but flat Earth. I don't mind talking about flat Earth anymore. At first, I was like, oh, I should not say anything because, you know, I don't know enough. I've just got my feet wet. But now I'm at the point where it's like, we don't live on a spinning ball. No, I'm totally fine talking about it. Family gatherings, friend gatherings, whatever. I've even written poetry on my own blog that's subtly flat Earth, just kind of making fun of the myths that we believe culturally. Throwing in some flat Earth stuff. I mean, think about that. Myths form us. It forms humanity of all generations. Myths at every level. It's not just generic religion or something like that. Myths form us and make us who we are. We identify or we don't identify in many ways. And the modern myths are almost entirely based on scientism. People believe it, and that's the modern myth. If it's scientific, that's supposedly objective, empirically observed data, even though that's exactly what flat earthers are saying is not happening, because empirical observation shows flatness, shows that we don't get rockets into outer space, shows that we don't make it to the moon, shows that we don't have a Tesla on its way to Mars.
Well, I was going to say, I think the craziest thing about it is never before has there been a myth in a culture as potent as the globe Earth. because, just like you said, because of the prestige of science and how, at least in the United States, we're brought up instead of taught to practice the scientific method and discern things for ourselves. In many ways, we're taught how to memorize scientismic dogma and regurgitate that. And there's a huge disconnect between science and theoretical physics. And personally, I don't even think we should call I don't think the two belong in the same category even.
Yeah, one's not sciences if it's purely theoretical.
Right, and non-demonstrable. Same thing goes, I think, with atomic theory, right? And electromagnetic theory at the nuts and bolts level of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. The more I've learned about alternatives, the more I'm definitely with that. There are things where me, just as a master electrician, I think, wow, like magnetism, dielectric forces, this makes so much more sense of what we have, even though it's still mysterious. But this makes way more sense to me than these invisible atomic particles that are moving on the surface of these conductors and capacitance on plates. And that never made sense to me in school. I just did the math. They give you measurements. They give you equations. If you follow those equations, you do the math, things work out. I mean, it does work out, but that's very different than explaining to me how electrons flow, valence electrons flow on the surface of wires. Like I mean, you ever been shocked by electricity?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
I've been shocked by 480 volts jumping at me from a wire.
Wow.
Jumping at me. So having to go to the hospital.
So that would fall in the range of high voltage.
It causes burns. Yes, it's very painful. It makes your body feel numb. Makes you feel sick and dizzy. I've been shocked by 277 volts. I've been shocked by 120 volts, the normal like household voltage, probably a couple hundred times. But like when you get into like what's actually happening, atomic theory, particle theory, to me, I'm totally open to that being complete nonsense. I know that sounds like hyperbole. I actually don't mean it as hyperbole. I do mean complete nonsense. There are alternatives out there, and it's just not allowed to be talked about in public because it assumes too many things about things being fixed in this world that we live in. In my estimation, you kind of need a dome above us and the Earth to be ground. I remember studying in school about lightning and why we did all these crazy grounding rules at almost everything. In our field, we got to ground 1 million things into the Earth. And did you know that like if you actually take a wire, like a live wire from overhead of your house, like you sever these live wires that are coming from an electrical pole and you shove them into the ground, not much really happens. Like electricity doesn't like go and it doesn't like spark and do any of these wild things. Like the ground is not a great conductor of electricity, but the ground is doing something which is absorbing I don't know what else to call it, more like free radicals that are electrically charged everywhere. It's crazy what the Earth actually is if you think about it from an electrician standpoint. It's crazy. It's like a big battery we live in. It's really crazy.
I remember reading a long time ago, long before flat Earth was even on the radar. Like I was probably still in high school, and it was something that Nikola Tesla had said. And I've looked and looked for this, and I can't find the quote, but he was describing ideas for free energy technology. And the long and short of it is he called the Earth itself a capacitor plate, and then the ionosphere basically the other plate. And I know that sounds kind of generic, but I remember specifically that verbiage being used. So the ground's the capacitor plate. Yeah, well, he said capacitor plate, and maybe this was a bad translation or whatever, but the ionosphere was the other plate. So you're dealing with like a dielectric plane, but it never occurred to me that, how could the spherical Earth be a plate at all, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you read other stuff that Tesla has written and said, there are things that he said where it may seem like he subscribes to globe Earth and infinite space theory, but it just seems to me overwhelmingly that Tesla at some point probably knew the Earth was flat. And of course, he was in one of those professions where I don't think it would have been very wise for him to go around professing it. And hell, maybe that's why he ultimately was blackballed.
Yeah.
But yeah,
By
Tesla.
JP Morgan.
Oh yeah, JP Morgan and Edison and all those buttheads. But Tesla was, I think, far ahead of his time as an electrical engineer, and he had designs for transmitting high voltage electricity, wireless communications. Just such a long time ago. It's crazy. And since you're an electrician, I would just pose a question to you. Does it seem like the big corporations and the governments have been rolling out or have rolled out Tesla-based technologies and sort of presented that as satellite-dependent technologies?
Well, I'm not in the field of the high voltage maintenance. I'm in the field of what is ordinary, mundane for commercial, industrial, residential stuff. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you that the industry pushes and pushes and pushes, and it's all corporate level. We talk in our state adopting certain national electrical codes and international electrical codes as well, building codes. And not a single bit of it is actually public. It's all by private corporations. It's all with all kinds of competing technologies and lobbyists pushing for the next one and how to fit it into a certain phase. And then states adopt laws to basically not piss off their population that they govern, at least not completely, and still make money, move forward with technology. And we are not really given a choice about what that technology is. In fact, in my industry, since I'm a self-employed electrical contractor, I've been on my own for about 10 years now, been doing this for almost 20. I can tell you that the industry standards have changed radically in the last 10 years to the point where I have no idea what's around the corner 10 years from now. I wouldn't have imagined that the things that are becoming normalized are as normal as they are. And the laws are being pushed to make us comply with them. And
so could you give a specific example?
Well, in my industry, a lot of the things are going to be with like switchgear equipment, how to ground systems, new technologies with sensing arcs in buildings with certain amperages, as well as in homes. That's another law. I guess this is a very small example, but National Electrical Code has had this thing called arc fault circuit interrupter protection in the national code, the corporate code, for about 10 years now. My state is only going to be adopting it about a year and a half from now. And it's the dumbest thing ever. It doesn't work. It's completely lobbyist built. But with that technology, by standardizing it, making the average Joe who owns a home and owns an apartment or whatever, by mandating it and all of that, then that gives them the funding to produce new technologies built upon that and push it at a higher level of research and development. If you can't get the mainstream to become familiar with it, there's no way the mainstream are going to allow it to be pushed in the commercial and industrial level. It actually begins with the more urban environment.
Okay. Yeah, because I know I'm no master electrician, but actually last year I worked as an electrician's apprentice for about 6 months. We were building a hospital, and I actually had a lot of fun with it. I enjoyed the work. We did some hard stuff, pulling wire and bending pipes and all that good stuff. But I learned a little bit more than I knew before about electrical circuitry and that sort of thing. And I was shocked a couple of times as well. But the guy my boss, he was a really nice guy. I questioned him a little bit, picked his brain a little bit about electric theory, and he too agreed. The whole theory with electrons and valence electrons, he understood it, but couldn't point to any sort of evidence, 100%, smoking gun evidence to say that that's actually what's going on. But so what I think, when they start rolling out these new standards that everybody must adhere to, and whatever that technology may be, a lot of times you'll find, if you follow the money trail, that there is some sort of a device or I don't know, technology that now has to be purchased. And it seems like a lot of these statutes are just written into law so that contractors have to buy more stuff that is produced by manufacturers who are lobbying the hell out of Congress, right? I mean, is that?
Oh yeah, new technologies have to be patented too. So, just with the example that I gave, if they can make it more common to have this new kind of arcing protection in 50 million homes, what that's doing is that's subsidizing the industry. It's not helping me, the taxpayer who owns a home, and it's not helping me, the contractor. It's not helping my clients. It's helping the industry, and then their profit sharing can increase, and they can do more R&D, research and development. That's really what it's about. I live in Wisconsin. I live in Milwaukee. I'm just, an hour north of where that horizon photo of the Chicago skyline was, the famous mirage.
Right, yeah.
The miracle mirage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, which, by the way, on a clear day, you can zoom in with the P900 and you can see Michigan. So FYI, everybody out there, you shouldn't be able to see that at all from even city of Milwaukee. As far as the technology is concerned, I've been in all these meetings with the state of Wisconsin, with all these inspectors and with these different bureaucrats, being kind of polite with the public. But I'm the contractor who gets to get behind a mic on occasion and ask a question. And I've once was in a public meeting saying, this is dumb. And these things don't work. They're more of a nuisance than they actually save lives, and so on and so forth. But then they will come back and they'll say, well, it's going to help the industry. It's going to help the industry. It's going to help the industry. I mean, thank God, they're probably thanking God that none of that stuff is recorded, on video for the public to share. It's just for all the people in the room, the 300 people or so that are there. But that's really what's going on. It's all business. I mean, these companies, if you produce electrical equipment, I mean, it's just a matter of time where a patent gets missed to be renewed. Somebody buys it and then they duplicate it 15 other ways. And now they're out competing this other industry. That's the way it is in electrical. You go to a Home Depot or whatever, you see all these generic brands, and then 2 years later, it's a different series of generic brands with the new contract pushing the same product. That's why they need to have these new technologies, because if they don't get the funding for the corporation, they can't do more research and development for more technologies. And God knows what they're doing at a much bigger level with this technology. It's just a way of making the public fund all these technological advancements so that they don't necessarily have to.
Well, and a lot of times it seems like they may be reinventing the wheel, right?
Yeah. It isn't totally creative, which blows my mind that people think that, like, in the so-called space industry, they're developing all these, amazing technologies to see, from Hubble or whatever, or what the ISS can do, or what God knows what we'll find out one day was on that Tesla when it finally lands on a planet, right?
Yeah.
Lo and behold, this ordinary car had the camera of the Tesla, by the front license plate or whatever, that the smart sensor went off and shows us new footage of what Mars is like. I mean, just the rhetoric. I can imagine the rhetoric, but I honestly don't believe that we can do a whole lot more than what we're doing. I think that the fundamentals have been known since Tesla, and we're just spinning. We're just, we're not doing anything more because we don't live on a spinning ball. We are limited, and we just have to figure out a way to push new technologies with science that isn't popular, but not let the cat out of the bag. That this doesn't work on a spinning ball.
Well, it's almost like they're keeping us with archaic technologies or obsolete technologies just to save face. And I guess I'll give you an example. And you had mentioned this earlier, but science, as far as I know, still does not have a complete, rational, coherent, cogent explanation for the phenomenon of thunder and lightning. They have theories about it. Same thing with tornadoes. But in terms of the exact mechanics that's going on, we'll just stick with thunder and lightning. They they cannot tell you exactly what's happening. And in my limited understanding of electromagnetism, it's because if they were to give you the real reason, then it would suggest, it would fly in the face of the spinning ball Earth theory and the idea of where the Earth's electromagnetic field comes from.
Yes.
Because as far as I know, they say that the Earth's electromagnetic field comes from basically molten nickel or some molten heavy metals in the center core of the Earth spinning around. And I can't think of any example where a magnetic field is generated by molten metals spinning around. Can you?
No, and plus it's way hotter than anything that actually could produce a magnetic field, or let alone the problem that magnets don't exist in balls. Can you tell me a ball that's a magnet? I've never seen one.
Right. And so furthering on with this line of thought, if we were to start capitalizing on and making public technologies which utilize this natural electric, what's the word I'm looking for, potential between the ionosphere and the ground, and coming up with technologies to capitalize on that, then it would become clear, or it could potentially become clear to electrical engineers and such, that something ain't right here, in terms of the globe. But on the other side of that token, you've got millions of pilots all over the world who are flying planes over a stationary planar Earth and don't realize it. So I don't know. I mean, maybe that's going out on a limb in the electrical side, but
no, I definitely agree with you that they're not going to let that cat out of the bag with technology. I do think that there are organizations that know, and they operate in the assumption of a flat Earth with their technological advancements, but they don't make that the publicly known part of their research and development.
Right. And it's like, what advances have been made really since Tesla? I mean, yes, the devices, I think, have gotten better, and maybe the frequencies, they've started using a wider band of frequencies and, going wider still with the 5G technology that they're rolling out. But in terms of Tesla, the stuff that he was coming up with during his time was just so far ahead of his time. You would think that this day and age, we would have just all sorts of stuff that was comparable to that or better than that.
Yeah.
But it just seems like all they're doing is rehashing Tesla's stuff and calling it satellite based or whatever.
Yep. I was talking with a good friend of mine last Sunday over at his place for dinner. He's not a flat earther or anything like that. He's a real good guy. He doesn't believe in any big mega conspiracies, but he does believe in like people at an individual level conspire. And one of the things he said was, if you'd think that if these companies could develop the technology to give us free energy, that it would have been done already, because, what better way to sell a product, And my initial thought was, well, no, if free electricity could be a thing, which I believe it is, but if free electricity could be distributed worldwide or even at a local level, that would ruin industries. And there would be so many lobbyists that would pump just millions and millions and millions of dollars to stop that from occurring. Just simply because Tesla's theories could, from what we know, would actually ruin industries. People won't do it. They're too greedy.
Well, I agree with you that may be motivation enough, although there would always be, the big players in those technology fields that could still gain from devices and things like that. But I think even deeper than that, and again, I do agree, but I think even deeper than that, it all boils down to the petrodollar. We all know that the United States dollar, used to be backed by gold. And but way back in 1912, I believe, when the Federal Reserve was created, they were put in place to try to prevent inflation. And decades and decades later, Nixon took us off the gold standard. And now here we are 100 and some odd years later since the inception of the Federal Reserve Bank. And the dollar's worth about 5 cents or less than what it was before. Now, instead of being tied to gold, all of the oil in the world, more or less, in the Western world, is purchased in US dollars. And so if you were to suddenly, nix the worldwide addiction to oil, and free energy would certainly do that, then suddenly overnight the petrodollar collapses. And frankly, any technologies that come up to the plate that are free energy technologies, the patents are either bought out by greedy, big corporations who never do anything with them, or if the inventors don't want to sell out, they end up suicided and their patents end up, disappearing anyway.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Don't get me started on what I know about patent law. I have a friend who developed a gizmo. Cost him over $1 million to get a patent to go through, and in the end of getting immensely in debt, it was stolen from him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't doubt that happens a lot. Sort of reminds me of Einstein, right? Because he was a patent clerk. And according to all accounts, Einstein was not, the brightest student in the school. And, everybody says he was quirky, forgot to tie his shoes because he was a genius. But according to people that knew him, he wasn't quirky and sloppy and rude because he was a genius. He was just he was a butthole. And he wasn't really all that smart. But I think that there really is good evidence that he was stealing people's ideas from the patent office, denying their patents, and then repatenting them under his name. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah. There's a few things like I think even if I'm not mistaken, E equals MC squared was purported by I can't think of the guy's name. I want to say Lorenz, but no, that isn't it. But yeah, there's several instances where Einstein was basically, there's good evidence to show that he was stealing people's ideas during his time as a patent clerk. And one thing that it seems apparent was that he was a compromisable sort of individual, like prone to honey traps or honeypots or whatever. And so, for some reason or another, science with a capital S made Einstein the poster boy for theoretical physics, and his wild, non-demonstrable theories about space-time and gravity and all the, everything that goes with it were just given all the publicity and prestige of the mainstream media. He was thrown funding, basically became a superstar overnight for theories that, can never be proven. I mean, does anybody really expect someone to accelerate matter to the speed of light squared to confirm Einstein's theory, right? I mean, it's crazy, but right.
Yeah. And don't get me started on, like I said, on the patent stuff. I truly know from firsthand experience that it's not just like corporate greed getting involved. At some level, the government comes in and can shut down certain technologies that are too efficient. And then they end up being the chief conspirators to help another private enterprise develop that technology on their own. That's what happened with my friend. And funny enough, I know this firsthand because I buy the product now. It was on a Kickstarter that started a year ago, and now it's a very successful enterprise. And my friend is the one who patented the original technology before the IRS came in and stole his computers and shut down his business over really frenzy laws and ruined him. And he did absolutely nothing illegal.
Oh my goodness, that is crazy. And that kind of reminds me of, not to change the subject, but and I don't know much about Mark Zuckerberg or Facebook, but I did see the movie, and I don't think the movie probably said the whole truth, because there is some evidence coming out to suggest that Zuckerberg has ties with the CIA, or Facebook has ties with the FBI, or one or the other. But it really seems like the two guys that came up with the conceptual ideas for Facebook, he sort of stole those ideas, but he didn't just steal them. It seemed like he was given big help, support, financial support, backing, by who? That's up to the imagination. But since Facebook is apparently working hand in hand with the FBI, then, it could be them.
Yeah, well, you can't, if the CIA or FBI would come out and say, hey, we want to market a big platform where everybody gets smartphones and tablets, and they all give us all their private information, and they just click the agree box without ever reading it, nobody would sign on to that. But if you get a private corporation to do it, you know, and working with attorneys to make this special lingo and work with federal laws for the safety of people, well, then everybody does it. We're doing it right now. We got like what? Compliance laws with our cell phones, with the apps we use, with the computers we use, with the software used. Does anybody ever read all that fine print?
Right. Now, in terms of your friend's invention, was it sort of like a patent pending thing while he was selling it? Or
Nope. Fully his patent. He had tested it. It was an oil product. So it began with something that he developed for about a decade, that it was an additive to vehicle engines. It worked with all oils. Synthetic, he had to have a different formula for synthetic, but with standard oils, it worked best. It began as an additive. You add to your engine this little 3.5 inch tiny vial. You'd add it to your engine. And what it does is that he developed a way to make a solid lubricant, where the greater the heat and the greater the friction of this additive, it created greater and greater lubricity, and it actually cleaned engines and actually increased the engine life. You know how they do those engine tests with like AMSOIL and stuff, where they run an engine, they pour it full of oil, then they drain it, and then they run it until it burns out, like a 50,000 mile test or something. They just run this engine block. Right. Well, his never stopped. It took him $50,000 to get into that competition after he developed not just the additive, but an actual oil. The engine never stopped. It kept running. And when they chopped apart the engine and took photos, I've seen the photos, it was clean as a whistle. The engine would have lasted forever. And now you can buy it. It's called Tribotex, by the way. I mean, I guess I'll market it for whoever's out there on the Kickstarter. Now you can actually go to Tribotex.
You're throwing your buddy under the bus and giving them a free plug. No, I'm kidding.
Well, the thing is that like I remember looking at it on this Kickstarter, and it's backed by all these military organizations and government organizations for testing. And the testing began the year after he got into all this trouble and his business went under. The year after is what they say on their Kickstarter is when R&D started beginning on this new technology. The year after.
Wow.
That's not a coincidence, man. And it is exactly his product. I mean, it's insane. It's totally insane what he went through. I was one of the bystanders in court with him. I mean, he was going through hell. He lost everything. And over technology that was very helpful. And what is it? It's minuscule. I mean, it's not even remotely as big as something like flat Earth and the things we can get out of recognizing that. It was as simple as making engines efficient with something cheap.
Yeah, well, they don't want that because, you know, it's the stuff that you have to keep buying over and over again is where these big companies make their money, right? So, like, one thing I notice is if you go and buy a printer at Walmart or whatever, the printer's pretty darn cheap. Yeah, but then no, when the ink runs out and you go to try to get the ink refill cartridges, they're more than the new printer, right? So yeah, it's no surprise, but at least, you know, I will say, I guess the silver cloud lining here is that your friend didn't end up suicided in the trunk of his car or something. So
yeah, he did not end up that way. He went through more hell than even what I've described, though. So I commend him. I haven't even described the half of it that he went through. That the least of the worst things that he went through was losing his business. It's family problems and friend issues, all kinds of issues came out of all of that. It was a horrific nightmare to live through, and I commend him for making through it in a very sane way.
Yeah, that's definitely. So earlier you had also mentioned the phrase space technologies. I take notes because if I don't, then I'll forget. And that's why it seems like we may be a little bit out of order here. But I had looked into patents that were filed by NASA because, you know, one of the big claims by NASA is that they are, you know, doing, you know, providing a benefit for mankind because they are, you know, coming up with all these new technologies and patents every year. But if you actually go and look at the patents, the majority of them, and the ones that I spot checked, the inventors aren't even astronauts. So, you know, it's sort of implied that they're coming up with all these inventions in space. But when you get down to it and look at, well, who's actually inventing these things, they're not even astronauts. So, you know, what the crap?
Well, now there's a master's class, that's being advertised on like Facebook and stuff with astronauts. We should just ask them. What's his name? Tim something. He's the new spokesman for NASA astronauts. I forget his name. But now they're teaching courses to the public about how you too can someday grow up to be an astronaut. I think it's all just a joke. I don't think that they actually know how in the world NASA even claims to get them into outer space. Well, not only because they've never been there, but because the technology doesn't exist. I think that they're more or less acting. They're trained in a school. They're trained to be good at the school of thought, but it's a school of thought.
Well, and I don't even think they're trained so well in that because, like, for an example, you can watch astronauts being interviewed about how the stars look from space, from the ISS. And about half of them will tell you that you can see no stars. Space is basically a deep, velvety black. You can't see any stars from cislunar space. And the other half will tell you not only can you see the stars, but that you can see so many bright, brilliant stars that it's hard to pick out the constellations. And you can also see the zodiacal lights and the Magellanic clouds. And so it's like, you would think that they would at least get their stories straight on those sort of things. But, it seems like they they don't even have to do that because, frankly, people believe whatever they say regardless.
Well, did you happen to listen to the last podcast of the Flat Earth podcast where they had the son of a NASA astronaut on?
Which channel?
The Flat Earth podcast.
Oh, no, I have not seen it.
So the very last episode they came out, they had a guest on who had given a speak pipe to their show the week before, and they reached out to him and asked him if he wanted to be a guest on the show and to talk about what life was like growing up as a kid, to have a dad who's an astronaut. And now he's a grown man. He works for Hollywood, interestingly enough. And he even admitted quite a few times that he gets how the industry can be manipulative. And but he gave all kinds of really, really, really overly simplistic explanations, like nothing at all persuasive, as to like why you can't see stars or why you can, like the difference between the moon landing reports and what people at NASA say now. Like, oh, you can definitely see galaxies out there. Well, this guy was drilled. He was asked a number of practical questions from a flat Earth perspective, like, what do you do with this and what do you do with that evidence? And his explanations were really silly. Like, it's not at all persuasive to anybody that has really looked into flat Earth stuff, because flat Earth evidence it's not some superficial thing anymore. I think that this is huge.
Oh yeah,
flat Earth is not a joke, and people need to wake up that this is not some it's not a conspiracy theory that can just be like brushed away as a quote unquote conspiracy theory. It's nothing like that. This is like actual observable evidence, and with what we're told does not make sense. And if it's left to some elite that we can never get the full explanations from, that's not good enough. That's totally not persuasive enough for me. In fact, you know what? I wanted to say this. This is something that's been in my mind the last couple of weeks. I've told Travis this. Travis, are you still there? Travis, you still there?
Yeah, I was muted.
Oh,
I'm just a fly on a wall. Carry on.
I'm gonna let you do more talking next, Travis. But I said this the other day. I was like, why is it that people today, I mean, we know the answer is like massive propagation and mind control kind of stuff, but like, what is it about today where people can believe that NASA and other, quote unquote, global space institutes, all these multi-billion-dollar and trillion-dollar military organizations and private corporations and all these governments, that they can conspire so systematically and so regularly to nearly flawlessly do moonwalks and rocket ships and space travel and ISS and all this stuff, but they don't believe that they could fake it that systematically. That blows my mind. They're like, oh, you'd have to be crazy to think that they'd be that organized to fake it. But they believe that they're that organized to actually do it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
If they're that organized to actually do it, they're at least organized enough to fake it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you start looking at things that they claim that they've done, and you could give countless examples in terms of like the Apollo missions, when they allegedly landed that lunar module on the surface of the moon, 250,000 miles away from the Earth in an alien environment. They allegedly landed that thing perfectly, nailed it on the first attempt, obviously. When that thing had been tested on the Earth, in reality, they couldn't get it to land properly even one single time during testing. So, you look at other things like supposedly you've got the radiation belts up there, the Van Allen belts, which are
Yeah.
full of, radiation that the space shuttles that allegedly went to the moon didn't have any sort of shielding for radiation. And even though Van Allen did warn NASA about this radiation that's up there, they didn't take any precautions. And yet the astronauts allegedly didn't experience anything as a result of this radiation. And so, it's just, there's so many things where it shows that they're lying. But I think it's a point to make that just because they're lying doesn't necessarily mean that they know the Earth is flat.
Yep.
So, like, I know for sure that the astronauts are lying for whatever reason. Maybe they know the Earth's flat, but maybe they're just doing it because they're getting a paycheck to do it and they don't care. But you have another level to this where you have people, real, decent, normal, everyday people who are, let's just say, designing pieces to go in the rocket, designing gadgets. I don't doubt at all that those people are actually designing these gadgets, and they're probably also being manufactured by other people. And so, I get a lot of messages and comments from people who say, oh, are you calling my uncle a liar? He works for NASA and he's designed this part, and, he'd never lie to me about this. But, the point is just because they're building these things doesn't mean anything. I mean,
I know a guy named Steve. He's the father of an electrician that I work with, and I grew up with this family for most of my life. And I remember the day he finally graduated to a point in his career from being a machine shop guy to going to this technical school and all this crazy stuff to work for NASA. And all he did was build parts for NASA. He was just a mechanic for NASA. And he talked about how incredibly detailed, like everything needs to be documented, every torque of every bolt and blah, blah, blah. But I don't think he's lying. Like, right. And I don't think he believes the Earth is flat. He's just doing his job. In fact, the more micromanaged it is, the easier it is to present a dishonest picture.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, and NASA, of course, and even I would say SpaceX, that they're run in a fashion to where it's very compartmentalized. And so, unless you have super, super high clearance and you're very, very high up, you don't necessarily know what the guy in the proverbial cubicle next to you is doing. Yeah. Only a very few people are privy to the big picture. And so you're right. I mean, it would be very easy to mislead and even trick very, very smart, intelligent, well-trained, well-intentioned people who, they have nothing to do with this hoax, but they are working for NASA designing these things, or, wherever the case may be. But again, that doesn't mean that they're actually using those things in space.
Yeah, they're just doing their job. And that's at the bottom line, the way we've broken down culture to be as economic as it is. And economics there is in scare quotes. We just do what we're told. We want to keep a job so we can pay our bills. And if you get into a prestigious company, you care more about being able to say, well, I work for this prestigious company, than you actually do care about like how everything else works in the company. You care about doing your part well if you're a good employee. And that's all that matters. But that does not mean that they're going to be aware to the much bigger picture. They need to come across a Morgile video to raise some awareness.
Well, that'll never happen unless somebody shares it with them. But yeah, no, YouTube is doing a pretty good job of sort of dry containing flat Earth in social media. I don't think they're necessarily going to go and try to take all the flat Earth videos down, but as we've seen, they have definitely shot down and deleted a whole bunch of channels in the last couple of months. But what they do instead is they put videos that they don't agree with philosophically, basically in a limited findability state or something to that effect. And it makes it so that people are less likely to find flat Earth videos, and that even if you do find flat Earth videos, you're going to find stuff that is intended to try and debunk flat Earth. And so, the best thing that we can do is, like you said, is just at least get the idea into people's minds, because honestly, you're never going to convince somebody of this within just a single conversation or a single video. But if you can get them interested in looking at it, and that person has integrity and really wants to know the truth, then they'll find it, because at the end of the day, it is pretty obvious. It's not that complicated. Unfortunately, the amount of programming that we've all undergone for our entire lives is very powerful and complicated. So it's an uphill battle, but I think that, case in point, new people stumbling into this topic every day is something that they're not going to be able to put into the bag so easily, because, well, they say the truth shall set you free. But I say that once you set the truth free, it's unstoppable, because, you're never going to disprove something that's obvious and self-evident.
Yeah. Well, they're going to say, well, where are your credentials? Are you an astrophysicist?
I get that question sometimes, and I just say I'm a human being with a brain. Because what other credentials are there, really? I mean, a piece of paper. I went to college to play guitar. Does that help?
Well, then you have the ironic criticisms, like what about gravity? I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand gravity. To understand gravity. It's like, well,
Right. Well, and that's, gravity is one of those things, and you had sort of alluded to this earlier, but it's one of those things where the Earth is assumed to be a globe as a foregone conclusion. And so when people like Neil deGrasse Tyson drop their microphone on the ground, release the microphone and it falls to the ground, supposedly that proves the theory of gravity. But, again, all that he's doing is demonstrating the fact of nature, that what goes up must come down. But somehow people have, or the educational system has, switcheroonied what goes up must come down with proof of gravity. And it is an amazing sleight of hand, I think, that they've done. But yeah, people to this day will swear up and down that, we know the Earth is a ball because apples fall from trees. Which is frankly the last thing that you would ever expect on a spinning sphere. But hey, who's counting?
What a world we live in! What a time we live in! None of this would be possible if so many other things didn't come before it, like a much more monumental economic change, the way the financial system is driven, the way the corporations are driven. I mean, once we took a photo from that little round window that NASA somehow leaked, which they claim was a photo of the Earth from orbit on its way to the moon.
Right.
Once people saw that, I mean, there was no going back. I mean, they'd already had so many things in place. Then they get the laws passed, and they get the funding, then the bureaucracy grows, and the propaganda grows, and the educational aspects grow. On and on and on. It creates a whole new myth, and everybody operates according to that myth.
Right, because it's like as soon as they get what they want, and whatever the case is, whether it's the the Apollo mission where they got the fake photos of Earth, or whether it's 9/11, once they get what they want, they don't even care. I mean, it doesn't even matter if they get caught later, because they basically carve everything in stone in terms of the laws on the book. Like, I don't know, the Patriot Act after 9/11, or more fund allocation to NASA after Apollo. So they do have these sort of motivations, but when it comes to NASA, I think that their underlying goal, their underlying mission is mind control. Absolutely, mind control. has nothing to do with space exploration, but this whole mind control operation that they have in place about the globe feeds right into the underlying paradigm of the 21st century, which is all very selfish and very godless and very materialistic. And, people tend not to see it until you've come all the way over to flat Earth. But, at least for me, my worldview has changed considerably. I value the little things more highly because I don't know. It's just the whole philosophy has changed. I mean, it really is a paradigm changer, and I think that that's their most the biggest fear that NASA and these Illuminati guys have is that everybody's going to wake up and realize that they've been lied to about pretty much everything, including the Earth itself. And hopefully, we can at least be a small instrument in that awakening process.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm proud to be in it now. I mean, it flat Earth exposes so much, and because it's so observable and testable and repeatable on so many levels, especially at an electrical level. I mean, it's bound to challenge quite literally everything. The house of cards has got to fall sometime. I mean, it has to. What I grew up learning doesn't make any sense to me anymore. It's kind of hilarious. My kid watches my 6-year-old son watches the new Magic School Bus on Netflix, and occasionally I get to see the episodes that he's watching because my son's really big into science, and because my wife and I are so new to this stuff, we have developed a philosophy where instead of disallowing our son, we've got 3 children, but allowing our oldest son to watch these scientific programs, we actually like observing them along with them, and when they say things, we're just like, that's just their best guess. Science, like, do they really know that, or are they just guessing? I mean, because so much of science is just guessing.
Yeah, absolutely.
We want that drilled into our son's head so that when he's older, he can make up his own mind. I'm not going to propagandize my son to be a flat earther. I mean, I hate to break the news. I'm just not going to do that. I really do think that flat earth is so commonsensical and the evidence is so obvious. And I am saving stuff for him to watch when he's of age, like videos from YouTube.
How old is your son again?
He's 6 years old.
Oh, 6. Yeah, that's probably a little young. And I don't think we necessarily want to make him the black sheep of the classroom when he goes in with a project about flat Earth. So, yeah, probably a wise move. But
we before all this, he loved the planets. He could name all the planets and all the little moons from Maki and all these other little ones that are orbiting around. He could tell you so much about it, and dinosaurs and everything too. Really big, and he's like a walking encyclopedia with that stuff. And like he's got the planetary bodies, so-called, stickered to his bedroom ceiling. He still has them up there, but we just don't push it. It's like someday, he's going to know that the way he was raised is that there are a lot of scientists out there just doing their best guess, and all these TV shows are pushing these guesses on us, and I've said things to my son like, well, I don't know what's out there. Have you ever been in outer space? Of course the answer is no. We never have been in outer space. Just that someday he needs to make up his own mind. If he ends up a glober, it's like, whatever. I mean, the evidence is out there. It's a matter of his will to look into it. And right now he's 6 years old, so I don't want to put that pressure on him. But like, it's so commonsensical. That's honestly why I believe it.
Well, like when you look at things like LIGO's claims, with the most recent one, where of course, after the flat Earth debate is raging on the internet, right in the middle of all this, LIGO comes out and makes a statement that they've discovered gravity waves, and of course, these gravity waves are coming from 1.3 billion light years away, which means that the event happened 1.3 billion years ago, and they're looking at theoretical black holes colliding. And all of this stuff, they're purporting it as if it's a proven fact. Yet at the very basic level, this is pseudoscience because what they're purporting can never, ever, ever be demonstrated, never repeated, never verified. Yet they purport these things and assert these things as if it's 100% certain. And it does raise a fundamental question that, if gravity is this well-known, proven thing that everybody knows, then why do they need to spend billions of dollars on LIGO to search for 1.3 billion year old events like this, right?
Yeah, great question. Yeah. I mean, we all know that in the real scientific communities that are even doing all these experiments and trying to develop upon their, their theory, their heliocentric based theories, that they know their limitations. They know that within the actual scientific guild that they don't know what gravity is. Although everything we learn is that we do know what it is. It was figured out for us a long time ago, and it's now purported as a fact. It's kind of like in religious spheres. There are things which academicians talk about within certain religious tribes, like Catholicism, that would never be considered something that would ever be preached from a pulpit. It just would never make it to the pulpit. And we're in like the world of the pulpit, where we get things that are mainstream, watered down, given to us as fact. You have to believe this to be part of our tribe, or you're out. And that's basically how everybody learns. But there are academicians and scientists out there where they know that's not honest. That's not what's really going on. They don't know.
Right. Well, and it seems to me that anything like gravity, and maybe you can talk to this or speak on this more than I, but okay, so flat earthers all pretty much agree that what we call gravity is heavily reliant on density and buoyancy. So like if you have 100 tons of steel that's compressed and drop it in the ocean, it's going to sink to the bottom. But if you take that same 100 tons of steel and make a ship out of it, it'll float on top of the water. If you take helium and put it in a balloon, it's going to raise up in the air, and if an apple falls from the tree, it rests on the ground. So a lot of this is density and buoyancy dependent, although you still must have a tendency for high density objects to fall down. And that is correct. Globe earthers say that this is proof of gravity because density and buoyancy, high density objects would not know how to arrange themselves if it were not for gravity. You must have this tendency for down to be down. Yet I believe that there's good evidence to support the idea that this is an electromagnetic or a static electric phenomenon, having nothing to do with space-time or the theory of gravity. And I'm just wondering, John, have you heard much or thought much about that aspect of it?
Yeah, I think there's dielectric forces happening all the time with material. I think the ether is something that needs to be brought into discussion. That, of course, was, if you Wikipedia it, that was disproven. The theory of relativity and the rest of all that stuff. No, I think that actually matches the equations, and you don't have to assume that it has anything to do with mass of objects alone and some gravitational pull. That's totally assumed. If we're in an enclosed environment that is electromagnetic and electrostatic, those are fields that have forces with material objects, and they don't leave traces. And that makes perfect sense of everything. And it's adaptable to everything that you said, would have weight, with density and buoyancy and so on and so forth. It makes perfect sense. In fact, I cannot anymore fathom. In fact, it's comical to me how the theory of gravity just could have been swallowed wholesale as it is, where we think that, this happens on such a big level, but the force of gravity isn't great to keep a butterfly to the ground, or a butterfly is strong enough to push up against it and, in the air, or birds to fly, or what have you. There's so many phenomenons that gravity can't explain, and people will tell me, it is gravity, and gravity can't explain it. And I'm thinking to myself, that's just rationalization. I mean, anybody can come up with an excuse to rationalize a theory, but certain things are observable and do not make sense. An electric fixed environment, an electric fixed environment makes a lot of sense to me.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I was just going to say that just because gravity can solve an issue hypothetically doesn't mean that gravity is solving that issue in reality.
Yeah, but they're talking about a force, though. So, like, to me, it's always like the idea of a force. Well, at least with gravitational forces,
Right, because they'll correct you and they'll say no, it's not a force and it's an acceleration, which is like, okay, let's argue semantics, right?
Yeah. So like in some ways, in my mind, it always has come across as reacting with a field of some kind. But a field, like what is that? That's not something that contains particles, which is what atomic theory depends upon. Everything with mass and all this stuff, it all depends upon it. But if there are fields like involving magnetism and charges, that does explain what we describe as a force. I know it's complicated to go through, but because most people generally aren't aware of how electricity works. I mean, I make a living off of people that are afraid of it,
right?
as an electrical contractor, But there being fields everywhere that can manipulate and affect material objects, especially if the Earth is what it is. Oh man, it opens up whole new avenues for me. Gravitational forces and stuff, all that stuff can go out the window as far as I'm concerned. It's way too theoretical and nonsensical for me anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just tons of stuff wrong with it. And when Einstein was, very much popularized and essentially discredited a lot of what Newton was saying, with his theories. He had some pretty interesting and slick and clever forces behind him, I think, because what we saw were a couple, and I'll just name a couple, but we saw a couple of different independent verifications of the theory of gravity. One thing that I would mention would be gravitational lensing, and the other one would be time dilation. So are y'all familiar with both of those?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so this is what I think happened. And maybe we can just do a quick run through for time dilation and gravitational lensing so that we're all on the same page in terms of the listeners. Time dilation was a prediction that objects traveling, I believe, at a higher altitude. Man, I better just do the wiki on this. But objects traveling at a higher speed, at a higher altitude, are going to experience time at a different rate than someone that's standing still on the ground. So time dilation is basically, what they're saying is time is relative, and the fact that time dilation occurs, like if you synchronize watches and one person gets on a plane and goes Mach 10, across the world, and then compare watches, there's gonna be a slight discrepancy, and they say that fact proves the prediction made by Einstein in terms of relativity and gravity. Another one, the other one was gravitational lensing, where it was predicted that during a solar eclipse, stars that would normally be obscured by the sun, although we couldn't see them during the day because you can't see stars during the day. However, during an eclipse, you can see these stars. That the stars had moved their apparent position exactly as predicted, and so they were visible when they should have been behind the sun. So what they're saying is that the light from this star is coming towards the sun, going around its gravitational field, and then resuming its path towards your eye, and then therefore gravitational lensing proves gravity. So here's what I think happened. I think that Einstein and his teams already knew about time dilation. Maybe that somebody along the line had figured it out. And same thing about observations of these stars during eclipses. They knew that there would be a displacement of these background stars. And so what they did, much like the proverbial Mayan king who was a demigod because he knew when an eclipse would occur. Of course, he knew this because it was a verifiable pattern that they knew ahead of time was already going to happen. Similarly, Einstein and them took these things that were known to them, incorporated them as experimental proofs of his theories, and then lo and behold, these things occur, and their theory is thus hypothetically proven. Does that make sense at all?
Perfectly reasonable. But of course, it's assuming that they had been studying other fields covertly, But
Well,
I'm totally fine with that. I think that's more than reasonable because that's actually what takes place in the sciences every day anyway.
Mhm. So, like in the case of the gravitational lensing, I think it's highly plausible that anybody who had been studying eclipses or astronomy for a long time could have stumbled upon this, um, without thinking of gravity at all. And I
Yep.
think that that could be explained by electromagnetic field, possibly. So it's not
Yeah.
exclusive to gravity. And time dilation, I've asked several pilots, and they certainly don't account for time dilation when they're planning for their flights and stuff. But of course, time dilation must be taken into account for satellites and for the ISS, right? So I don't know. It just seems like more and more that we look at these so-called proofs for the globe and proofs for relativity theory and all this. It's just mainly circumstantial and just presented to the general public with a lot of prestige and pizzazz, and pretty much everybody jumped on board with it. Because again, it's not like you're going to falsify any of this stuff. It's not like you're going to prove that gravity or relativity does not cause time dilation. It's not like you're going to prove this lensing effect within the eclipse is not caused by the gravity of the sun, because frankly,
Yeah.
it's unobtainable. But I think that electromagnetism explains both of these things better.
It is like time dilation in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I'm glad that you actually think about these things because I don't know any other flat earther that does think about these things.
Oh, I'm sure there's hundreds. I'm just the one stupid enough to say it. No.
Well, I can't think of any major platforms. In fact, the only person that I can even think of that might be up to it, maybe we should encourage him to give his 10 cents on it, would be like Bob Nodell.
Oh yeah, Bob. Yeah,
he's an
definitely
inspiration to me, man. I'm not an electrical engineer, but when he says things, I mean, it resonates with me just because of some similarities in field. He's on the engineering side of it all. That guy's a brain. I admire him for his courage and what he's willing to say. I love it when you're on the Globuster show too. I think that's awesome.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and Bob's great, man. I love picking his brain as well because he has several areas of expertise that really lend themselves nicely to the whole flat Earth inquiry. And it's funny because in our experiences in all walks of life, we've all sort of experienced one thing or another along the way that maybe left us scratching our head about, wow, how does this work on a globe? Mine would be, the first flight I ever took from Florida to Texas and back. I was pretty young, and I was expecting the duration of those flights to be wildly different because, of course, of the spin of the Earth. And when I found that those two flights were essentially identical in duration, it threw me for a loop. But that lasted maybe a day, and I was back into Globeland because really, what is the alternative? I mean, it's not like someone is going to just sort of on their own volition come out and say, "Well, I've made this startling observation, and my conclusion is the Earth is a stationary plane." Right? It's just never going to happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Funny enough, I've got a client who is also on top of having a lot of work for me as an electrician. He in the real estate area. He is also an airplane pilot. And my very first conversation with him, like one of the first sentences I made with him, kind of awkward, but I don't mind, was like, "Hey, you're an airplane pilot. Hey, like, have you heard about what's happening with flat Earth? When you're up in a plane, is there really curvature or is it flat?" You know what he said? He said, "Well, I believe it's round, but to be honest with you, in all these decades of me flying, I've never seen any curvature. Like maybe I have, but we really don't fly high enough to see the curvature." And I was just like, "Oh, interesting. Just curious. Just throwing it out there. Want to hear what kind of reasons come up." But he's up in the air, and maybe it's going to dawn on him. Boy, I don't see any curvature when I'm up here. But when he gets down on Earth, he's back in Globeland, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think another big part of that too is the lack of motion. I know Travis, I think it was a video you had sent me recently or sent me a link to, was had to do with the Coriolis effect. And just wanting to be able to, oh no, I'm sorry, this may have been a different video, but wanting to be able to replicate what you see on small scale demonstrations of the Coriolis effect,
Right. Yeah.
in real life. And just nowhere in reality can you find instances where the spinning ball Earth comes into affect things like flight paths or trajectories for landing, approach. And it's just kind of crazy how there's lots of bright people who understand this basic sort of physics, yet when you try to apply it to the spinning Earth, and we don't see the results that you would expect if the Earth was in motion, then what we have to do is we have to start building up all these hypothetical excuses to make this observation work on a spinning globe Earth.
Yeah.
So
that's what I call the Saint Nick fallacy. You'll hear that talked about, Santa Claus being a good analogy to talk about. But when you talk about the impossibility of what Santa Claus does, and then a 7-year-old says, well, how does he do that?
Mm-hmm.
You just come up with an answer. And then when you come up with that answer, in 3 years, the 7-year-old goes, well, wait a minute. If he does that, then how does he do that? And then you just keep building on the fallacy, and it's just exponential. It never ends.
Well, you're right. And it's at what point do you have to sit the kid down and tell him that it was all a lie? However, with the globe, we don't get that luxury, except for finally in this generation. I feel pretty lucky because I get to thinking sometimes about, like, my grandparents and my great grandparents and aunts and uncles who have passed, and they didn't live to get to, to have a chance, at least a chance, to look into this topic as a rational adult. And it makes me kind of mad, because just so many people have spent their entire lives just utterly deceived. And it's sad and frustrating at the same time, because if you sit many people down and try to explain this to them, many times people will get angry and it'll ruin friendships. And sometimes I think what I hate the worst is when people say, well, like, this is like my mom. She's like, well, it really doesn't affect my life either way. So I don't care whether the Earth's flat or a sphere. And I'm like, really? So you don't care if you were lied to your whole life? She's like, well, it doesn't affect me. So I don't know which is worse, that or people getting mad. Because at least if someone gets mad and passionate, maybe they'll try to debunk you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, whoopsie. So you had sent me a link to a video earlier. Did you want to roll that so that we could respond to it?
I'm not going to be able to. I'm on my phone. So.
Okay. No, I got my computer working.
Oh.
So I should be able to share it. I just, I'm not 100% sure if the audio will come through on it. So, Karen B., are you around, or are you just letting the thing stream? Okay, I guess she's just letting the thing stream. Yeah, let me see if I can run that video. Bear with me 1 second. And
you still have it?
Maybe we can respond to it. Yeah, I watched it earlier. It should be in my history, or did I watch it on my phone? I can't remember.
Is this the video of the mountain measurements?
Right.
Yeah, that one. Bear with me 1 second, guys. This might take me 1 minute. If you can hold it down for 1 minute, and I'll be right back.
Travis, what were the things that made you want to share it with us?
I wanted to have confirmation in terms of what my initial responses were. So when I watched it, I just immediately felt like I had a reasonable interpretation of what was going on. And I just wanted to have confirmation, from that perspective, or to hear something else. If you guys saw another aspect of why the demonstration fell flat, then I would want to see where I could look at it from a different angle.
Now, was this something you stumbled across, or something that
No,
was
I had someone send it to me that I was in a Facebook discussion with him, and we were talking about. I was calling him out on begging the question in terms of assuming that the Earth has a radius, and so I was asking him, prove the radius. Where do you get the radius from? And he said, well, we can get it from lots of places. So he threw this at me, and I mean, seriously, within the first 30 seconds, I just sat there dumbfounded. I just thought, it's like when someone says for the first time, well, we see ships going over the curve. I just think that is the most base response that you could give, that is easily proven not to be the case.
So did you consider this one interesting enough, or I should say different enough from kind of standard flat Earth
because
critiques?
I'm not a huge mathematician, and so it was getting into trigonometry, and I was like, well, maybe there's something that I'm missing, but I don't think so.
Yeah, bear with me, guys. I'm still trying to find it to pull it up.
I know that you sent it to me via text earlier this morning when I was at work, and
yeah,
I can't say that I'm fully prepared to go back and forth with it.
Yeah, I don't think it's that hard. I think it'll be a pretty quick study.
And do you remember about what the title was?
I can send it to you again. I got it pulled up. I just
you can? Okay, because I wasn't sure if you were driving. So yeah, if you can forward me the link, I'll try and play it. And I'll probably do all this and nobody will be able to hear it anyways, of course, but we'll try.
It was I think it was Abu Rayyan Biruni,
is that what it is?
Great Persian scientist.
I've got it right here then.
What'd you do with it?
I can hear Karen B in the background.
Hang on one second.
Yeah.
That's the video, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I just got to remember how to share my screen, and then I got to see if I can share it with everyone hearing the audio. So I'm going to screen share. Okay, and then where did it go? There we go. Okay, so everybody in the chat, if you guys can tell me out in the chat if you're able to hear the audio, and I guess I better check the chat. Hold on, let it run. I'll restart it.
You can probably play it about 3 minutes and 30 seconds is when he starts to get into the technicalities. Otherwise, the whole thing is just the introduction to begin with.
Right. Okay. Okay.
I can see it. So. I can even see the chat screen.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see if anybody can hear it out there. If you guys can hear the audio playing in the background, let me know.
Didn't teach that the world was.
Okay, yeah, it looks like they're not going to be able to get the audio anyway, so we'll just go up to the I'll mute it. We'll go up to the 3-minute mark and maybe just describe a little bit, because this is a typical thing that, or typical sort of thing that we get from globe earthers, and I had never seen this one in particular. So basically, what they do is they use an astrolabe to estimate the height of that mountain right there. And it's just basically using trigonometry. They get the angular elevation from 2 different points, as you can see there, and makes a right triangle there. And you get all this lovely math, unless anybody else wants to explain that better. Lovely math. And essentially what the point of the experiment is, they're going to go to the top of that same mountain and measure the angle to the optical horizon with that same astrolabe. And in doing that, they are, quote unquote, able to estimate the circumference of the Earth. And I think one portion of this equation, if I'm not mistaken, is they assume the radius of the Earth. And they assume that to be close to 4,000 miles. Is that right?
Yeah, well, he gets the degree that takes him out to the horizon. And then he says in his description of what this guy did 1,000 years ago was that he imagined extending the triangle to the center of the Earth. So
Right.
It's so unbelievably presumptuous.
yeah, I just sat there dumbfounded.
Oh, look,
I couldn't...
look, there's a picture of us. Oh,
yeah.
So basically what they do is they assume that the Earth is a sphere, and then they take these measurements, these angular measurements, to estimate the circumference of the thing, assuming the radius as well. And do you guys know what year he would have done this? I didn't look
He
too
kept
far
saying
into it.
1,000 years ago.
1,000 years ago. So this would have been after the alleged Eratosthenes experiment.
Right,
oh, sure.
right, yeah.
So now I'm just wondering if it's claimed by history that these two areas of civilization were not necessarily in communication, but
No, one of the other things that he said in there, that he had a library that was that had the translation of previous works at his fingertips.
okay,
So it was implied that he was exposed to Eratosthenes ahead of time.
right, and that makes sense, and it isn't even necessary for the way that I see this to jive, but I was going to say, even if it was claimed that he had no knowledge of Eratosthenes and his values, it's funny because there's a specific mummy, I think it may have been Cleopatra, but they found cocaine and tobacco in their blood. And of course, cocaine and tobacco are indigenous to South America. So it just goes to show that there was sort of communication and trade between far separated civilizations. And so, okay, so this particular guy may or may not have been aware of Eratosthenes. But so what it seems to me like he did was he took an existing assumption that the Earth is a sphere and used Eratosthenes' value for the radius. Picked a mountain that either coincidentally worked or picked, was very meticulously chose which mountain he was going to use so that his results would jive with that of Eratosthenes to make a name for himself. Now, that's implying that he was dubious, so I don't want to do that. But my whole thing about this is that we know that regardless of how high up you go in elevation, the horizon doesn't drop. And so what we do have, however, and I guess I had better pause this video. Sorry, guys.
We're seeing we're seeing the future unfold before us.
Okay. So kind of lost my train of thought there. But yeah, it just seems like he was he tailored his experiment to fit accepted values. But okay,
Right.
so
wait,
you go up
I wanted to just say one thing briefly.
Sure.
It being a formal BBC network presentation professionally done, I'm not aware of any actual dimensions that are given in it where we could duplicate it. It's a presentation. It's making lots of claims, and you're assuming that what they're saying is completely honest, completely factual. There was no kind of like prep meeting, no table talk about how this was going to be produced and directed and presented. Like, we're just given this as a very formal professional product. That's the only 10 cents that I want to give. And there's nothing in it that I got out of it that is testable and repeatable. Apart from there being mathematical formulas, like whatever.
Right. Well, and yeah, definitely. Here's the other thing too. So when they were at the top of the mountain, what they measured was that the horizon had dropped, I believe it was 1/2 degree. And one thing that we'll see in all instances of long distance, super zoomed in photography, especially over water, is an area right above the horizon that is essentially, it's a mirage. It's a very slim section of the sky directly above the water that is, it's not actually the sky. So like I tried to pull up a video real quick, but I couldn't find it. You'll find videos where, and I know Jeranism has one up, where there'll be like birds flying around in the sky, and then they'll dive down towards the water, but the bird will disappear behind blue sky before it goes into the water. And then a couple seconds later, the bird will reemerge, a couple, maybe a degree or two above the water line. The bird will reemerge from blue sky. And so what you have is essentially an optical illusion or a mirage where the sky blots out maybe a half a degree of the horizon. Depending on the distance, depending on atmospheric conditions, it could vary. But it seems to me that that's what he was seeing. The horizon is basically at eye level from that top of that mountain. And because he's in the dense lower layer of atmosphere, there's a great deal of refraction. And you have this optical illusion where the blue sky sort of blots out some portion of that horizon. And so, again, I agree that this experiment didn't prove anything other than the fact that very smart people believed that the Earth was a sphere, or at least hypothesized that the Earth was a sphere a long time ago. And they came up with very good mathematics around that assumption to prove certain things. But again, the underlying premises of these experiments beg to be proven. And again, that premise would be that the Earth is a sphere in the first place, because in order for this experiment that they did in that video to work, you must first assume that the Earth is a sphere. And I'm sorry, but that's not how science is done. You can't start your experiment with a foregone conclusion that the experiment is supposed to be proving, right?
No, yeah, I'm with you. And math has a really persuasive way of hiding assumptions. I mean, you can have formulas that don't assume curvature, give the very different data, but also equally reach, as a formula, consistent demonstrable conclusions. You throw in a curvature formula, you'll also consistently get regular, repeatable, testable conclusions. But you're still assuming one thing over another. The math still works consistently. I'm not terribly persuaded by professional BBC shows that don't give too many details for me.
Right, and I think that would have been a helpful detail to discuss the atmospheric distortion that would have been there, as if he would have described. Now, when we do this, when we look out on the horizon, we have to take into account the fact that we're not going to be looking at the actual horizon, but the apparent horizon. And then, so we have to then take that into account. There was none of that. It was just a straightforward ipso facto, boom, boom, boom. So it wasn't as honest as you would have liked.
Well, in my mind, it's just fueling what people are already familiar with.
So what I was going to say to your point about mathematics, mathematics can be used to describe things, although if certain presuppositions are taken into account, then mathematics can be used to deceive if those presuppositions are faulty. So are you guys familiar with the video that Dr. Zach put out a while back?
You have to be more specific.
Yeah, I'm going to explain it. Basically, he goes to mathematically prove that a flat table is spherical based on using the same exact method that Eratosthenes used.
Yep. Yeah, I am familiar with that. I brought that up to Travis earlier when we were talking on the phone this afternoon. I was like, this guy, this group of guys, I think it wasn't even in English, if I recall correctly. It was like, had like subtitles and stuff, if I recall correctly. But yeah, they mapped it all out on a table.
Right. And so, so that goes to show that, to your point, I totally agree. And this is a perfect example, and it translates to the globe Earth deception just perfectly. And for the viewers out there that haven't seen it, basically, Dr. Zach took a table and also modeled this same thing in 3D, but physically did the experiment as well. Hung a light over the table. In front of the light, there's a convex lens. and then put pegs at certain intervals around the dead center of where that light, 90 degrees under that light, and then several centimeters away and spread out, whatever. You've got little nails on the table. And basically, the convex lens that the light was passing through caused the light to behave, peculiarly. And instead of that light traveling in straight lines, it was essentially curving through the refraction lens or the convex lens. And just by using the exact same mathematics, spherical trigonometry that Eratosthenes used, he was able to prove that the obviously flat table was a sphere, and the circumference of the sphere was, funnily enough, the diameter of the lens, if I'm not mistaken. There was a correlation.
Yeah, and it just goes to show that if you assume with the Eratosthenes that all the light rays are going in the same direction, parallel lines all the way across the face of the Earth, and that's what's making the difference in shadows, that's just as much an assumption as what was actually tested with the spherical lens on a flat table by this guy, Dr. Zach, or whatever he was. I mean, it does change anything. It does change everything. That's a fundamental assumption about reality. Same math. Same math.
Right. And, there's many of these funny correlations. A friend of mine, Brian, civil engineer, did extensive study into solar and lunar eclipses. And one thing that he found, and I don't think he was figuring in refraction, which I think is key to this, but I think it does apply itself to this. He found that according to all his measurements, the distance or the apparent distance to the sun in flat Earth is pretty much identical to the alleged radius of the spherical Earth. And so when you have that correlation, and then in this experiment that we just pointed to, you have the correlation between the diameter of the lens and the circumference of the hypothetical sphere, it makes you wonder what exactly is going on with the damn light. And I explain one thing that I can grasp is that we all have a subjective dome of atmosphere surrounding us and following us wherever we go. So where I see the sun to be in terms of angular elevation, another observer 500 miles away may have a different perspective of that because of refraction and this subjective bubble of atmosphere that follows us around wherever we go. However, it seems like there's also something else going on that's more uniform, and maybe it's something to do with the magnetic field, but the reason being is, of course, because we keep getting this result that is a 25,000 mile circumference, right? In terms of Eratosthenes' experiment. And, the fact that the other experiments that used the astrolabe came up with a similar figure, to me, that either means coincidence, or again, the guy was trying to make a name for himself and just cherry picked a perfect spot. But when you
we'll never know,
right? When you take a step back and look at all these different things, what an amazing, just exciting adventure into logic and science. And to me, the biggest shame about flat Earth is the stigma. Because, I always enjoyed science, was my favorite subject in school. If I had to pick the lesser of all the evils now. And it's just amazing to me how the shills and the trolls out there say that flat earthers are the ones who are anti-scientific, because we just more and more run into crazy things. Like, I never would have imagined in a million years that you could mathematically prove a table is a sphere. Just simply by placing light through a convex lens. So, yeah, bringing it right back to the beginning. Pardon me. Did I lose you guys?
No,
Nope,
I was on mute.
Yeah.
I was on mute. My wife walked into the room and asked me for help with something. I had to help with it quick. With all of these conversations going on, because so many things are increasingly obvious to the public, there will be more tests. There will be more people thinking logically and experimenting with, yeah, they may be new ideas to us, but we're in a generation where there's going to be plenty of people rethinking everything with just as much math, just as much investigation. It's only the beginning.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the most exciting thing about it too is that just the practical applications of our common sense to draw conclusions that are just wildly different than what everybody for generations has been taught. And it just goes to show that when you go ahead and question or try to prove these underlying foundational assumptions, how much of everything else changes as a result. So like when you realize the Earth is flat, it doesn't just change, how you look at the horizon. It changes the way that you look at everything else in the world and the extended universe and within ourselves. So,
yeah,
people tend to equate math to something boring and like prose and not very exciting. But I would tend to disagree now that being a flat earther for several years, because it just still never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah. One of the things that that has been significant for me to think about is I find history and science so much more intriguing now. I mean, if to think of alternate history in terms of 9/11, JFK, even with Abraham Lincoln and others, I sit there and think, if I would have understood this possibility in terms of what history was telling us, I would have been so much more. It was so much more interesting to think about it from that perspective. So I think that this is going to hit the right person at the right time, and we're just going to see a lot of development.
There are plenty of podcasts and stuff out there experimenting with historical theories and how things change, even in the sciences, and how things are buried. It's just unfortunate the flat Earth doesn't come into it. Everybody there?
Yep.
I just muted myself. Sorry. No, I was going to say the practical applications of what science could come up with in the next, say, 10 or 20 years, if everybody in the world knew the Earth was flat and was looking at the world from that perspective. It just seems like we would make just leaps and bounds in progress in terms of scientific advance, because so much time, effort, brain power, resources, I believe, is just wasted and squandered away with theoretical astrophysics specifically, but so many other theoretical physics. When scientists in general, or if the day ever comes where scientists in general realize the truth about flat Earth, I just think that it's going to open up it just opens up a whole nother realm of possibility for pretty much any profession, but I think especially the practical scientific applications.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So did you guys have, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, but it's going to need to make it into academia and textbooks. I mean, unless we imagine social media to be the only vehicle. And that's not how people are massively educated. Like, the scientific environment can advance even with flat Earth and can change their mind. But if it doesn't make it into textbooks through, government school programming and other college avenues, it'll still be a while. But like, I do believe that people already experimenting with things that only work on a flat plane. And electric theories. It's just a matter of somehow breaking through what is now the barrier, and the barrier is mainstream media.
Yeah, I know what you mean in terms of textbooks are going to be the definitive, the defining moment. So like when flat Earth is taught, at least as a theory, or a possibility in textbooks, then yeah, that's going to be a totally different world. But to get to that point, I think step one obviously is going to be awareness, and that could take a while. But the level of deception, once people get this, it snaps them into a different gear almost. And in order to get the legislation or the curriculum changed, it's going to take, way more than just social media. But it's got to stop.
Yeah,
I would
people are
really
going to have to. People have to stand their ground and say, "This makes more sense of reality. Stop feeding me the ball Earth model. I want to know, how this can work. I want to know alternatives. Like, start working with alternatives. People need to vote with their feet. In other words, at some point."
Right. Yeah. Indeed. So, did you guys have any other topics you wanted to cover? I'm not sure how long we've gone. It seems like we've gone about 2.5 hours. So I can definitely keep on going if y'all want to, or we can wrap it up. It's totally up to you.
Yeah, I gotta hit the hay. I gotta get up in a couple hours to do something with my truck. So I'm gonna catch some Z's.
It's fine by me if we ended now. Also, it's been a good show so far. It's been fun talking with y'all.
Awesome.
I wish Travis said a whole lot more. Travis, were you muted?
No, I mean, you guys were talking it up. I was soaking it in. Yeah, it was great.
Do this another time. I can come up with a lot of questions to ask. Even things, because it doesn't bother me that there are, in many ways, still mysteries to this world we live in. But to just pose questions, just be open-minded and think about how would this actually work. None of it at all shakes my belief in the reality of a flat Earth. That's just so demonstrable.
Yeah.
A lot to think about, a lot to chew on.
Absolutely.
Maybe for another time, maybe.
Yeah, man, definitely. We can do another hangout for sure. It was awesome talking with you guys. And if you really quickly want to tell everybody that's listening live and for the archives where they can find your stuff, Travis.
Well, the YouTube channel is The Plain Truth, so yeah. But yep,
you could open up the Facebook group too.
Oh yeah, I guess it is secret, isn't it? Yeah, but
growing Facebook group of people that are invited.
Yeah,
all the time,
the Facebook group is Rethinking the Curve.
We as admins, what we don't want is a whole bunch of just complaining, and we're not really interested in people that just show up to troll the site. So it is monitored.
You love the trolls.
Oh man. Oh man. Just genuine inquiry, and hopefully open-mindedness. People that are willing to think about both sides, because not everything on the globe side is as obvious as it first appears. So when people respond with the flat Earth side, just people that go on it that are part of the community just need to be aware that we've thought about these things. That's why we believe them.
Yeah, and another thing too, and I don't know if you guys have run into this, but in Facebook group type environments, you can get sometimes a little bit of a mob rule mentality from the flat earthers themselves. And I just try to deter people away from treating apparent globe heads too harshly, because we were all there once. And, if anybody that's new to this topic is going to have some brick walls built up around them. But if we can just work on them brick by brick, chiseling away little by little, planting seeds here and there that may help them down the road, I think that's constructive. At some point, we do know there are trolls out there and they take it to the infinite limit, and that's a different story. But I guess what I'm saying is we don't want to be pushing people away because of their belief in the globe. We need to welcome them, try to teach them something, and then pray that they're able to look into it further on their own volition. So,
yeah, the things that only frustrate me the most with like a Facebook groups is that I'll just give a simple response and say, yeah, that's really interesting. And if you're making these assumptions, yeah, that would be a very strong argument. But there are other videos out there and other links that we've shared on the page that would answer that. And I can link 1 to a dozen, and it just turns out that they don't end up really watching them for longer than a minute or two. It's like if you really take the time to think about this openly, then like I'm not kidding when I say that like these things have been thought about by other people and people a whole lot smarter than me, and they do actually make sense. Like it's just an alternative way of looking at the evidence. So.
Right. Yeah, I know what you mean. I had someone tell me about a year into flat Earth that the Earth couldn't be flat because when it's daytime in the United States, it's nighttime in China. And I was like, wow, there's a thing called day and night in reality. I never knew that. Yeah. So that person actually had to think that there are people out there professing the Earth is flat that were totally unawares of day and night. So.
Or when they look at the flat Earth, one of the models of how the sun and the moon operate, you know, in regular patterns, they're going to say, well, how does that work with gravity and the rest of our solar system?
Right. Yeah.
It's like, there are other, just keep digging, keep digging.
Well, and that's so difficult about the flat Earth is because you can't just prove to someone the Earth is flat. You also have to prove that infinite space and all the planets and solar systems and galaxies probably don't exist, and it's just stuff in the sky above the flat Earth. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah.
All right. Should we end the combo now?
Yeah, we'll wrap it up. Thanks so much for you guys hanging out. It was a pleasure and a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to the live listeners. You guys are the best. And y'all keep it flat, be real. And as always, spread the word, spread the world, and peace out.
Is it safe to talk?